Large language models are everywhere, and they get some things amazingly right and other things very interestingly wrong. And it's this last piece about inaccuracies, whether those inaccuracies are related to hallucinations or out of date information, that has largely limited the adoption of large language models in the life sciences sector. And so today I want to tell you about a framework that pharma companies can use to help large language models be more accurate and be more up to date by incorporating their own data sources into the model's knowledge base. And that framework is called Retrieval-Augmented Generation, or RAG for short. So let's focus on the generation part first. This refers to large language models' ability to generate text in response to a user query, or what is referred to as a prompt. But the problem is that these models can sometimes behave undesirably, and I can actually share a personal anecdote to illustrate this. So recently, a member from my team had asked me about the current standard of care for advanced or metastatic non-small cell lung cancer. And my response was, oh, I actually worked on a NSCLC project a few years ago. And at the time, I remember that platinum-based chemotherapies were considered the standard of care. But there are a couple of things wrong with my answer. First, I don't have a source to support what I'm saying. So even though I confidently said, hey, I know the answer, I didn't actually look the information up from a reputable source. I was just giving the answer off the top of my head. The second problem is that I admittedly haven't been keeping up with the latest guidelines since my NSCLC project a few years ago. And so my answer is out of date, particularly with some of the advancements made related to targeted therapies and immunotherapies. And so these are the two most common issues observed when interacting with large language models, particularly within a life sciences context. Lack of access to relevant sources and outdated information. So let's dive into how this RAG architecture addresses these issues for pharma companies. And you can imagine you have someone who works in competitive intelligence or market research or medical affairs. And this person has a question such as, what are the latest clinical and non-clinical updates from our competitor drug X? And so if we are using a standard LLM without RAG, we would have our UI application, our user interface, some kind of chatbot. We would have access to the foundational model, whether that's ChatGPT or Gemini or Mistral, what have you. And then we have the answer to our question, which would be based only on the model's training data. And we already saw how these large language models do not have the right access to the right data to answer these questions appropriately. However, we can enhance this experience in the RAG using a RAG framework by incorporating your own content into the fold. So this content can be internal reports, it can be clinical trial data, it can be competitive intelligence documents, market research, earnings calls, transcripts, et cetera, et cetera. And before the large language model generates a response to your question, it will actually retrieve all the relevant content from your data store that is needed to address and answer that question appropriately. So you can imagine that we have a question, again, what is the latest clinical and non-clinical updates from drug X? That question will actually be converted into a search query for the system to identify the most relevant documents that match this question that are needed to address this question. So it will search across all of those documents, identify the handful of documents, maybe it's 4, maybe it's 10 documents, what have you, that are needed to address the question. And then all of this information, so the question, all of the relevant documents, as well as any specific instructions or guidelines we want to include to the large language model, or what we call a prompt, will be sent to the LLM. And by doing all of this, the large language model can then generate a response based on your specific relevant data and ensure that the response includes accurate and up-to-date information. So in a nutshell, that's how RAG works and how does it help? So instead of having to train a large language model whenever new information arises, all you have to do with this RAG architecture is simply update your data store with the latest reports or the latest guidelines or the latest research findings, etc. And then when a user asks a question, the system can retrieve the most current information and ensure that responses are always up to date. In addition, with this RAG architecture, the large language model is instructed to use primary source data before generating a response. And so this eliminates the likelihood of hallucinations and provides evidence-backed, grounded answers in response to any of your queries. So this also enables the model to recognize things, or recognize cases when it doesn't necessarily have sufficient information to answer the question reliably. And the model can then say, I don't know, or I don't have sufficient information, rather than generating a potentially misleading response or what we call a hallucination. So that's a little bit about RAG, and ZoomRx has been helping pharma companies set up their own RAG solutions for the past couple of years now. From competitive intelligence to market research, clinical operations to R&D, our RAG solutions have enabled pharma companies to leverage their internal data and achieve accurate, up-to-date, and evidence-backed responses. So thank you for learning a little bit more about RAG, and please like this video for more educational content.